The first 25 years of the century have come and gone, and since I like any excuse to make a numbered list, it seems as good a time as any to reflect back on the best video games of the century so far. What are the most fun and memorable games that came out in the last 2.5 decades? If I asked you to come up with a list of 25 games, you'd probably start rattling off some titles off the top of your head. But if you're like me, you'll quickly find that there are way more than 25 games that all feel like they deserve to be on the list. So let's do this for real. Let's roll up our sleeves and see which games would actually make the top 25 of the century. The results may surprise you. Let me offer up the list of 25 games that I like the most, and then you can let me know in the comments which games you would include. On that note, you might be wondering, who the hell am I and what do I know about video games? Well, I've been an avid enjoyer of video games ever since my dad downloaded the shareware version of Commander Keen on the family PC back in 1992, a decision I'm sure that he would take back in a second if he could. But while I'm not a games journalist and have no real connection to the gaming industry, I feel like I've played such an embarrassingly large amount of games that I can still make a pretty informed list of great games spanning over different genres and time periods. This is not an objective list. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It's totally subjective in that it's based solely on my opinions. This is not about the most important or influential games. It's about the games that are most meaningful to me. So if you're looking for more of an objective list that's based on committee consensus, I'm sure those are out there, but this isn't that. This is mostly just an excuse for me to talk about some of my favorite games, and if that leads to even just one of you finding a new game that you like, then it's all worth it. Paring down the best games of the century to only 25 entries was really difficult, and it's legitimately painful to think about some of the amazing games that are going to get left off the list. The good news is that means that everything that did make it is without a doubt a certified banger.
All bangers all the time. Yeah, all bangers all the time.
Before we get to the main event, let me quickly explain the rules I used while making this list. The first one is pretty obvious. Nothing released before the year 2000 qualifies. Pretty self-explanatory, I know, but there are so many undeniable, foundational, all-time classic games from the 80s and 90s, and none of them will be featured on this list. And it's actually maybe a bit more fun to have an excuse to leave those games off the table. Plus, the whole reason for doing this is because we hit the quarter mark of the century, so yeah, we're gonna keep it within the century. The next rule I gave myself is that I can only pick one game per series or franchise. The list could potentially be pretty repetitive if I just kept picking games from my favorite game series, so for the sake of a more interesting list, I forced myself to choose one game to represent each franchise. The exception being when a franchise has spin-off games that are totally different. For example, mainline Mario games are different than Mario Kart games, so it's okay to have one from each series. Alright, enough of me yammering on about rules and whatnot, let's get to it. Without further ado, here is my top 25 games of the century so far. It's hard to imagine now, but sometime in the not too distant past, real-time strategy games dominated the PC gaming scene. It's a genre that demands a lot from players, rewarding those who are quick thinking and efficient at multitasking, which is bad news for slower-minded people such as myself. However, that didn't stop me from getting hooked on Warcraft II and then StarCraft in the 90s, despite generally being pretty dogshit at doing more than one thing at a time. Then in 2002, we got Warcraft III, which took the Blizzard RTS formula to the next level. It featured 3D graphics, 4 playable factions, adding undead and night elf to the well-established dynamic of orcs and humans, and it added hero characters to the mix, which allowed for more interesting and dynamic combat strategies. However, the main reason this game is on the list isn't because of its standard RTS game mode, it's because of the custom games. Blizzard always used to include level creation tools with their games, which led to tons of inspired game modes made by fans that I still think about to this day. There were some incredible variants of tower defense games, which I played for hours on end. I mean, Dota started off as a custom map for Warcraft 3 and then eventually spun off into one of the most popular multiplayer games of all time. I'm personally not a Dota guy, but there were so many other great custom modes like Footman Frenzy, Winter Mall, Pokemall, Line Tower Wars, and much, much more. I have many fond memories of playing Warcraft 3 online with my friends after school. It was just a good time. With so many different game modes to play, Warcraft 3 still felt fresh long after its release. Do you remember a time when Microsoft wasn't constantly shooting itself in the foot? Well, during the heyday of Xbox 360, Xbox Live Arcade led to an explosion of high-quality indie games for the console. One of the most iconic early games for the XBLA era was Geometry Wars Retro Evolved. I played the ever-living shit out of that game. It was simple yet challenging, it had a gorgeous art style, a killer soundtrack, and featured super tight twin-stick controls that many have imitated, but few have been able to match since then. Best of all, the whole experience was available for like $5. But I'm not here to talk about Geometry Wars Retro Evolved. I'm here to talk about its incredible sequel, Geometry Wars Retro Evolved 2, which was a step up in both look and feel from the first game. It added 5 new game modes, which spiced things up and made the game even more replayable than the original. Of the new modes, there was one in particular that stood out to me: Pacifism. Pacifism takes the twin-stick shooter and presupposes, what if you couldn't shoot? What if you had to clear enemies by weaving through these floating gate things that explode when you pass through, and flying with precision was the only way to survive? It's so simple, but my god, it's so addicting. I've played this game mode an insane amount. It is without a doubt the hardest game to put down once you get going. There's this irresistible feeling of just one more round that happens every time I die, and when I get locked in, it's some of the best flow state gaming that I've ever experienced. This is probably going to be one of the more controversial titles I have on here, considering the really high quality level of some of the games that missed making the list, and for some of you, I imagine this will bring my overall judgment into question, but I wouldn't be true to myself if I didn't have this on here, because Geometry Wars Retro Evolved 2 is one of my favorite games to return to, and it hits every time. Sadly, this is the only mainline Geometry Wars game that is not available on Steam, so the only way to play this is on an Xbox. However, if you want to play a really similar game that's available on Steam, I highly recommend checking out Sectori. I've been playing this game a lot recently, and it brings me back to the high mark that was set by Geometry Wars Retro Evolved 2, so check it out.
Hello, investors. Cave Johnson here. Now, I know you've sunk a lot of money into the dual portal device, but I'm here to tell you we're not banging rocks together over here. We know how to make a quantum space hole. Carolyn? See? Portal here, portal there. Look at this thing go.
Speaking of sequels that successfully expanded upon their original game, Portal 2 took the signature mind-bending physics puzzles of Portal and raised them to the next level.
Good work, Boots.
The first game was a fresh take on the first-person shooter that asked the player to use some outside-the-box thinking in order to get through its gauntlet of levels. It was the surprise gem of the Orange Box back in 2007, but it was a pretty short game that definitely benefited from being part of a larger collection of games. Portal 2, on the other hand, is a robust sequel that feels like a more complete experience. There's a lengthy single-player campaign that adds a bunch of wild new puzzle mechanics, and there's even an entirely separate 2-player co-op campaign that requires coordination of 4 portals to solve puzzles instead of the normal 2.
I'm seeing double here. 4
Portals. It's a bigger, badder, and brain-meltinger game than the original. The famous dry humor is back, now featuring more characters with little lore drops that provide an amusing context for all the puzzle solving that takes place.
You might have a very minor case of serious brain damage.
The slick and sterile science lab aesthetic is iconic, and it's extra cool because the art style serves the gameplay. The clean presentation makes puzzles understandable without needing any kind of written or oral explanation of what you need to do. This is one of those rare games that is all killer, no filler. I fired up Portal 2 for the first time in many years to capture footage for this video, and my friend and I had a blast playing through the co-op campaign. Okay, I got a ball.
And now I think we're in good shape.
I don't think so. Don't think so. Portal and Portal 2 pushed the boundaries of what a first-person shooter could be and demonstrated how much more room for creativity is possible within an already crowded genre. If for any reason you haven't played Portal 2, you owe it to yourself to give it a shot because to this day, there's nothing quite like it.
You should now feel mentally reinvigorated.
This one will probably be a bit controversial because it's a relatively recent release and it's tough to know if this is real or just recency bias, but I have to go with my gut. At number 22, I'm going with Hollow Knight Silksong. I'm a big fan of Metroidvania games in general, and Silksong represents the best qualities of the genre put together to make it perhaps the most refined Metroidvania I've ever played. It expands upon things that made Hollow Knight great, while also mixing up the formula enough to keep things from feeling like a retread of the first game. The controls are tight and the character movement is fantastic. The game manages to feel fast and fluid without feeling weightless, and this time around you can even change the player's moveset to best fit your playstyle via the crest system. There's no shortage of boss fights, but thankfully those fights are high in quality, and even the ones I don't like, I still have a begrudging respect for. The level design is engaging, challenging, and memorable, and the map has plenty of things to do and secrets to find. The art style is gorgeous, and the music and sound design are excellent and highly immersive. I also just like the look and color palette of Silksong a bit more than I did with Hollow Knight. Now, I should probably address the most divisive aspect of this game, the difficulty. Silksong can be almost absurdly challenging at times. But I don't personally see that as a problem. The difficulty is integral to the experience and helps emphasize the oppressive atmosphere that the game presents, much like the Souls games. It's the type of challenge I like in games of this nature. I would frequently stumble into an area or a boss that seems impossible at first, but after a few attempts, I would get a little bit better and eventually get to the point where I would get the confidence and skill to overcome the challenge. And man, what a great feeling that is. Victory, my friends. Oh, yeah. Wow. Beating bosses in Silksong is satisfying enough to trick my brain into thinking I'm actually accomplishing something in my life. Now that's a powerful drug. Conversely, if I really feel stuck at a hard section, this map has so many branching paths and there's almost always somewhere else I can explore in the meantime. Poking around elsewhere on the map often leads to acquiring upgrades on top of just generally getting better at the game, so when I finally return to the place that I was stuck at originally, I'll have what it takes to get the dub. It's also worth noting that many of the most difficult parts of the game are optional. There's only a few points in the game where you're bottlenecked and forced to tackle a really hard boss, and even then you can try different crests and items to try to tip the scales to your advantage. Hollow Knight Silksong feels like it was made with lots of TLC, as well as meticulous attention to detail, which makes it a game that's a real treat for players to experience. This game just feels like it has it all. It's deep, it's engaging, it's polished, it's punishing, it's rewarding, and it's one of the best games of the century.
Super Mario Odyssey!
If this were a list that could include games from the 80s and 90s, Super Mario World or Super Mario Bros. 3 would undoubtedly be near the top of the list. However, even when you only look at games from the 21st century, Nintendo's flagship franchise still has a few bangers in the modern era. Editor's note, I wrote all of the entries for this list at different times, and in the editing process, I kind of noticed that I say certain words and phrases a lot, and the word banger in particular is one I use a shameful amount of times. I probably should have gone and changed a few of them to a different word, but you know, what's done is done, and I'm just gonna take the shame in stride. It was a really tough call to choose which of the modern Mario games should make the list, but in the end, Super Mario Odyssey narrowly edges out Super Mario Galaxy 2 to take the 21st spot. Super Mario Odyssey is a massive 3D platforming adventure that is just bursting with creativity and is simply a delight to play. The first time I got to a part where there was classic 2D platforming sections within the 3D world, I was grinning from ear to ear. There's a shit ton of stuff to do in this game, and there's often multiple ways that you can get the required moons to move on to the next area. I've heard the complaint that there's too much stuff to do, and I get where that's coming from, but also, I don't know, man, so much of the stuff is optional that you don't even have to do it if you're not having fun. I didn't get 100% of the things in this game and probably never will, but that doesn't mean I didn't have a thoroughly satisfying experience. Despite the wide variety of goals, the signature Nintendo polish is on full display and pretty much everything is well designed and fun to play. Perhaps most importantly, you get a hat-wearing Shiba Inu that travels alongside Mario, and for whatever reason, it's rendered in a completely different art style that's more photorealistic than Mario. That's kind of what this game is all about. The clashing of aesthetics and art styles shows to me that the developers had carte blanche to let their imaginations run wild and try out a plethora of ideas and mechanics. And did I already mention that the dog wears a hat? What more do I even have to say? It's just a damn good game, and it was the main reason I bought a Nintendo Switch in the first place. Okay, so I actually originally had a different game in this spot, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. It was a watershed game that changed the way competitive shooters were made, and it was a big game for me back in 2007. However, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I had COD 4 on this list mostly because of how monumental it was, rather than how I personally felt about it. And while I do really like Modern Warfare, I think it's a masterpiece, there's another game made by essentially the same people that I like even more, Titanfall 2. Call of Duty 4 walked so Titanfall 2 could run, or wall run rather, and you could feel the Call of Duty DNA all over Titanfall 2. The fast player movement, smooth 60 FPS gameplay, punchy weapons, satisfying hit feedback, multiplayer progression unlocks, and a cinematic single-player campaign, all things that were a huge part of Call of Duty 4's success that were later perfected in Titanfall 2. I made a whole separate video review of Titanfall 2 back when the game came out in 2016, so I encourage you to check that video out if you want to hear more detailed thoughts about the game. But for the sake of not repeating myself too much, I'll keep this section pretty brief. Simply put, Titanfall 2 is everything I want out of a first-person shooter. It has some of the best overall game feel in the biz. The single-player campaign is exciting and memorable, and it gets more emotional than this type of game ever has the right to be.
It's cold, BT.
Correct. Anderson's current temperature is 17 degrees Celsius, below the threshold of human survival.
Sure, it's only about 6 to 8 hours long, but I'll take a short and sweet game that leaves me wanting more over a bloated game with pointless filler any day of the week. The multiplayer is fast and frenetic in the best way, and the Titans add a pretty crazy X factor to heated online matches. Titanfall 2 wasn't nearly as big of a hit as Call of Duty 4 was, probably because it was released by EA around the same time as Battlefield 1, which was also released by EA. So Titanfall 2 was essentially buried by its own publisher, which almost certainly robbed the game of the popularity and acclaim it deserved at the time. However, I think the word of mouth has spread wide by now, and if that word never got to you, well, now it has. Give Titanfall 2 a shot and you won't be disappointed. I can't speak to how populated the multiplayer servers are at this point, but the story campaign is still worth it on its own. And I just don't think it would have been right to make this list without this game on it.
Protect the pilot.
Balatro, or Balatro, or Balatro? No matter how you pronounce it, Balatro just might be the most addicting game I've ever played in my life. It looks like some kind of run-of-the-mill video poker game at first glance, but there's so much more going on than just poker. Balatro isn't even really about playing poker. It's about deck building and carefully balancing the right kind of synergies with Joker cards. It's about trying different strategies and taking risks. It's a game that you can break wide open with the right combo of cards for massively high scores, and the game encourages you to find ways to break it. The high you feel when everything is working in perfect harmony happens frequently enough that I always wanted to keep coming back for more. It's a game that's a little hard to sell by describing it or showing footage of it. You just have to play this thing to understand why it's so captivating. I played an absurd amount of this game on my PC and Steam Deck, but once Balatro came out on phones and tablets, shit son, it became nearly impossible for me to stop playing. I had a kid about a year ago, and I can't tell you how many hours I spent in those first few months with the baby asleep on my lap as I grinded away towards that gold stake difficulty on my iPad. It's great to play while listening to a podcast, it's great to play on its own, it's easy to put down and pick back up. It's the perfect game for a busy lifestyle or just wasting away a few hours. There are a few other roguelike deck builders like Slay the Spire and Monster Train 2 that narrowly missed making this list, but Balatro is undeniably one of my top 25 games of the century. For as long as I can remember, Mario Kart has been the go-to local multiplayer option with friends and family, and Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is the best and most complete game in the series. It's one of the most accessible games out there, and it's the perfect choice for bridging the gap between weirdo video game players and non-video game playing weirdos. Even my wife, who doesn't really play video games, enjoys a good round of Mario Kart here and there. The low barrier for entry makes it a great party game, and drinking and driving isn't illegal in the Mushroom Kingdom. Social aspects aside, Mario Kart 8 is excellent in its own right. It has a massive roster of characters, a wide variety of karts and bikes, and frankly, an impressive amount of courses, including a bevy of great levels from previous Mario Kart games. In many ways, it's like a culmination of the entire franchise, and it makes the previous entries feel obsolete. The graphics are good, the controls are tight, and the Luigis are vengeful. The only real complaint I have is the item scaling / rubber banding that happens where it gives better items to the players who are furthest behind. But for a colorful arcade racer, it's totally acceptable, and when you're playing with non-gamers, it makes them less likely to quit since it gives them a puncher's chance to get ahead. I don't have a whole lot to say about Mario Kart 8. This isn't one that's particularly complicated or nuanced. It's just a really fun game that you can play with anyone. It's a game I don't play all the time, but a few times a year without fail, I find myself playing Mario Kart with friends and family, and it's a blast. I haven't played Mario Kart World yet, and only time will tell if that will become the new default Mario Kart, but for now, Mario Kart 8 is king.
My name's John Marston.
Red Dead Revolver was a cool little game on the original Xbox, a straightforward arcadey western shooter that had its moments, but was linear to a fault and wasn't particularly memorable or noteworthy. However, when I heard that the sequel was getting the full GTA treatment, it piqued my curiosity. As a longtime fan of the Grand Theft Auto series, I was interested to see how Rockstar's open-world game formula would translate to a Western setting. Turns out, it worked pretty damn well. At the time, I recall people referring to Red Dead Redemption as Grand Theft Horse because it was basically just a GTA game with horses instead of cars, which isn't totally wrong per se, but it felt a little dismissive of what Red Dead accomplished. I'm just gonna say it. Red Dead Redemption is the best game that Rockstar has ever made. The shooting and gunplay feels awesome, the soundtrack and music are fantastic, and the open world feels so lived in and immersive. Don't get me wrong, the sprawling cities of the GTA games are wildly impressive, but the scaled back, desolated setting of the Old West just feels a little more handcrafted and purposeful. Most of the map is devoid of anything man-made, which is both serene and terrifying, because you never know what kind of apex predator is stalking you as you carry out your business. Another thing that sets Red Dead apart is its characters and story. Sure, it still has a lot of that acidic Rockstar snark, and some of the side missions can feel a little bit like filler, but the main storyline is so well done that I actually cared about what happened to the characters and even felt emotional on occasion, which is a rare feat for any video game story to accomplish as far as I'm concerned. When that Jose Gonzalez song kicks in during your first trip south of the border, god damn, that is absolute cinema. The game feels like a love letter to classic Western films, and Red Dead Redemption is about as close as you can get to playing the main character in a Sergio Leone movie, and I think that's pretty cool.
Turn around! You boys are embarrassing yourselves!
This was a tough call between The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. And even though Tears might be the better game overall, Breath of the Wild was the one that had a bigger impact on me because it came out first, and also it's the game I spent more time with. As with Titanfall 2, I made a separate in-depth video review of Breath of the Wild years ago, so please check that out if you want to hear me gush about this game longer. Breath of the Wild is a sprawling action-adventure game that is on one hand very accessible, and on the other hand pretty damn challenging at times. One of the coolest things about this game is that it basically just unleashes the player into a massive and dangerous open world, and lets the player determine where to go and what to do. The game lets you stumble into highly difficult areas early in the game, and it's up to you whether or not you want to head back to an easier area or defiantly plow ahead against all odds. Even though there are some tutorial sections at the beginning, they aren't mandatory and are completely missable if you happen to not find them.
Was I supposed to find this at the start of the game? Oh my god. This is the tutorial. You can backflip in this game? Parry at the right time. I didn't know you can charge attacks.
No matter which way you decide to go, there's always something interesting or rewarding waiting for you in every direction. The map might seem a little empty at first, but there's so many hidden treasures and challenges waiting to be uncovered. Breath of the Wild is one of the all-time great exploration games, but there are also a lot of other things going for it. The combat is easy to learn but difficult to master, and pulling off a perfect parry is a massive dopamine hit. The art style is clean and cohesive, and the minimalistic soundtrack is effective and adds to the mysterious atmosphere that the game is going for. Everyone loves to complain about the breakable weapons, and while it's certainly not my favorite mechanic in the world, I don't really mind it because it encourages you to try out different loadouts and motivates you to continue exploring to find more powerful weapons. I have a lot more to say about Breath of the Wild in my other video review, but this game is a stone cold classic and an absolute must play. I don't have a Switch 2 yet, but I can't wait to see what this and Tears of the Kingdom feel like at 60 FPS. Even at 30 FPS, Breath of the Wild is one of my favorite games of the century and of all time.
All units, emergency. Officer in danger. Easter Plaza, repeat. Easter Plaza, all units.
They were all dead. The final gunshot was an exclamation mark to everything that had led to this point. I released my finger from the trigger, and then it was over.
As a big fan of Duke Nukem 3D back in the 90s, I always kept my eye out for any game published by Duke Nukem's developer, 3D Realms. So in 2001, when 3D Realms published Max Payne, I scooped it up as soon as I was able to convince my dad to take me to the local EB Games at the mall. I could tell that he was disappointed that I wanted to spend all of Grandma's Christmas money on a video game instead of literally anything else, but by taking me to the store, he also enabled me to buy an absurdly violent video game that I literally could not have bought on my own without a parent there. So shout out to my dad. Kids these days have no idea about the hoops us old heads had to jump through in order to buy violent video games, or listen to explicit music, or see R-rated movies prior to the modern digital age where you can just download or stream anything with the press of a button. Max Payne might have been published by 3D Realms, but it was developed by Remedy. I didn't know the difference between a publisher and a developer at that time, so my younger self thought I was walking into a breezy action game by the people who made Duke Nukem. While it certainly was an action game, my 13-year-old self was not prepared for how gritty, intense, and adult the experience would be. And when I say adult, I'm not talking about the campy, alien-infested strip clubs that you visit in Duke 3D. I'm talking about a game where the protagonist comes home to find his wife and baby brutally murdered during a home invasion, and now has an insatiable pill addiction and a penchant for violence as he takes on the criminal underbelly of New York City. This was probably the first video game I'd played where I was truly captured by a narrative and not just the action. The noir-style voiceover and comic book interludes provided intrigue and context to the gameplay while also contributing to the incredible atmosphere on display. I feel like I've said this kind of sentence for many of these games, but whatever. This applies to a lot of them, so it's okay. The story was solid and more interesting than anything I'd experienced at the time, but it's the gameplay of Max Payne that really hooked me. It's a challenging, adrenaline-fueled action game with John Woo-style gunfights that had my heart pounding. The shooting and weapons feel great, which is important, but there are also many stylish flourishes that made the game special. I'm pretty sure this was the first game to use bullet time, meaning you could dive in slow motion like Neo in order to get a leg up during combat encounters. Diving around corners with a gun in each hand and taking down bad guys before you even hit the ground never feels old. It's a kick-ass game that pushes your skills to the limit and has a number of unforgettable moments. The nightmare sequences where you run through the black void on a path made of entrails towards the crying sounds of your dead child are absolutely terrifying and are burned in my brain for all time. If you have played and enjoyed some of the modern Remedy games like Alan Wake 2 or Control, and you haven't played Max Payne, it's still well worth your time. Be sure to check out the excellent sequel, Max Payne 2: The Fall of Max Payne, as well. As of this recording, they've recently announced a remaster for those two games, which might end up being a great starting point for newcomers of the series. Until then, the original games are still available on Steam and are usually pretty cheap, so there's no better time than now to pop some pills and get some of that sweet, sweet revenge. Dragon Quest is one of the longest running video game franchises, but it's way more popular in Japan than in the US, so I had somehow never even heard of the series until about 6 years ago. I was looking for a cozy game to play as society was crumbling during the pandemic, and after seeing a glowing video review of Dragon Quest XI by Tim Rogers, I decided to give the game a spin. And man, that was a great call by me. On the surface, Dragon Quest XI looks kind of like a stock, generic fantasy role-playing game with knights and castles, dragons, skeletons, wizards, etc. And that's exactly what it is, but it has that kind of special sauce that elevates it above the sum of its parts. It's a game that feels like it's the culmination of years of refinement of the classic turn-based RPG genre. From the characters to the locations to the dialogue, it's just oozing with charm, and it helps that the characters were designed by Akira Toriyama, the legendary creator of Dragon Ball. One of the things that surprised me the most about this game was how great the writing is. I found myself really invested in all of the characters in the main party. They each bring their own personality and backstory into the fold, and there's lots of great interactions that they have with each other. The story is mostly bubbly and whimsical, but occasionally it slams you with these moments of profound sadness, and it's really effective. There are some gobsmacking twists as well. For a seemingly generic fantasy story, this game takes some real risks, and the experience is better for it. The world feels rich and lived in, and the player is frequently rewarded for taking the time to talk to side characters and for exploring every corner of the environment. Okay, so Dragon Quest XI is a very long game. It took me about 90 hours to complete the main storyline. I usually don't have the patience for this type of super long RPG, but this game has a brilliant feature that made the game easy to jump back into. Every time you load up your save file, text appears on the screen that reminds you what is currently happening in the story. It tells you what you just did and what your main goal is now. This must have been a pretty work-intensive thing for the developers to implement, but holy shit, it was extremely helpful, and it enabled me to continue making progress in the game even after taking long breaks. I played this game on and off for like 5 years, and I still saw it through to the very end thanks to this feature. I'm so glad that I stuck with it, because Dragon Quest XI is an action-packed, epic, funny, emotional, and beautiful game that every fantasy fan needs to experience. Sometimes when I'm stressed out, I wish I could just move out to the countryside and live the life of a farmer. I could grow crops, build a barn, raise livestock, and flirt with all the local townsfolk. In reality, this would be a complete disaster, of course, but thankfully I can still live out that fantasy by playing Stardew Valley. I just talked about how Dragon Quest is a great cozy game to play, well, Stardew Valley is even cozier. It's a game where you can totally immerse yourself into its small town lifestyle as you fix up your grandpa's old farm. It's not all about growing crops and raising livestock. There's quite a variety of things you can do in Stardew Valley, from foraging, mining, fishing, collecting rare artifacts, and selling artisanal goods, to fighting, flirting, loving, and procreating. It's a farm sim, a dating sim, and a dungeon crawler all at once. There's a constant feeling of progress that makes you feel like you're really getting stuff done. The game runs on a day-night cycle that lasts about 20 minutes of real time, which is both a brilliant and simultaneously dastardly design choice. I say that because the day-night cycle makes the game even harder to put down, because after a day is done, I always want to start a new day just to quickly check on my crops. Next thing I know, I'm watering the crops and milking the cows and harvesting honey, and once you get going, you basically commit yourself to playing another 20 minutes, and before you know it, you've evaporated several real-time hours in what feels like a blink of an eye. The activities you do in this game are essentially just chores when you think about it, but thankfully spending time in Stardew Valley is a very pleasing experience. The pixel art is cute, the dialogue is witty, and the music is soothing. This is the epitome of escapist entertainment, and I love it. I've probably played more hours of this game than most of the other games on this list, and I can't imagine a top 25 without Stardew Valley. Pro tip: always keep a jar of mayonnaise in your inventory just in case you bump into Abigail. Nothing gets to her heart faster than the gift of farm-fresh sandwich spread. I didn't think I would like this type of game, but I'm glad I tried it out for myself and learned how wrong I was. If you think you're too cool for Stardew Valley, as the late great Ryan Davis once said, get over yourself. I'm generally not a driving game guy, but what the Forza Horizon series presupposes is, maybe I am? Forza Horizon 5 is the Mac Daddy of all arcade racing games as far as I'm concerned. It's a game where you drive around a gigantic and varied open world with a staggering amount of things to do. Story missions, stunt jumps, speed traps, drift zones, treasure hunts, street races, off-road races, drag races, sprint races, circuit races, and so much more. The previously mentioned list of activities might seem overwhelming, especially when you open up the map and it just looks like someone vomited icons all over the land. But the secret sauce of this game is that it doesn't force force you to do any of it if you don't want to. The races are fun and I enjoy them, but Forza Horizon is about freedom. Sometimes I just load up the game and just drive. There's something kind of zen about just flooring the gas pedal and cruising aimlessly across the landscape. Sometimes I'll stick to the roads, other times I'll cut through the woods or smash through fences or take a jump and fly off a steep cliff. No matter what you do, the game will still reward you with experience points and other perks, even if you aren't doing a specific activity. You can watch the score meter pile up for doing almost anything, as long as you don't crash to a stop while doing so. I've spent many hours zoned out in a kind of flow state just driving across the world in Forza Horizon 5, racking up kangaroo bonuses and pulling off obnoxious e-drifts. It's pretty brilliant that you feel like you're progressing in the game no matter how you approach it. It's not the only driving game that lets you do that, but I think Forza Horizon does it the best. Another thing that I have to mention when it comes to Forza Horizon 5 is the presentation. This is a big-ass budgeted AAA game that features gorgeous graphics and pristine fidelity, and most importantly, it is polished and performant, which is sadly increasingly rare when it comes to modern AAA games. It's just a really pretty game to look at. The sound design is top-notch, and I'm even a fan of the music playlists included for the radio stations, particularly the drum and bass station called Hospital. If you want intense racing action, Forza Horizon provides. If you want a relaxed driving experience with no particular goals, Forza Horizon 5 provides. All of this applies to the other Forza Horizon games, particularly 3 and 4, but since I'm only putting one game per franchise on the list, Forza Horizon 5 is the most complete game in the series and has the best locale for its map. Editor's note, this video has taken me so long to finish that a 6th Forza Horizon game has come out since the time I originally wrote this section. I've played about 20 hours of Forza Horizon 6, and there's a good chance it will end up replacing Forza Horizon 5 in this spot. Japan is an incredible setting, and the new map is fantastic. However, at its core, the gameplay is basically the same as it was the last few Horizon games, which isn't a bad thing, but that just means that you can take pretty much everything I said about Forza Horizon 5 and apply it to Forza Horizon 6. Just something to keep in mind as we now return to my original review. It's a game that I would recommend to any and everyone regardless of how you feel about driving games. If you happen to have Game Pass, it's even more of a no-brainer, although Game Pass is so expensive nowadays that maybe you don't have it anymore. Either way, Forza Horizon 5 is a banger of a video game, and it has near infinite amount of things to do, or not do. And I can't think of a better way to decompress after a long day than going pedal to the metal into the Horizon. Fez is a game I learned about from watching the 2012 documentary Indie Game the Movie. The other games featured in the movie, Braid and Super Meat Boy, were really solid, but Fez is the game that really clicked with me. The best word to describe my playthrough of this game is magical. On the surface, Fez is a cute and colorful puzzle platformer where you jump around and collect yellow cubes. The game centers around a mechanic where you can shift your perspective of the level, revealing that each 2D area is actually 4 different 2D areas, creating the illusion of a 3D environment. Many puzzles force the player to explore all of the different 2D perspectives in order to find the collectibles, which has the effect of almost rewiring the player's brain and how they parse the environment. It's really cool. This mechanic alone is mind-bending and inventive enough to make the game stand out on its own, but there's so much more going on in this game than meets the eye. Your character has no health bar, there are no enemies, and jumping off a cliff just causes you to respawn where you jumped. Yet the game is still rather difficult. The challenge lies within discovering and solving the deeper puzzles. Puzzles that you might not even recognize as a puzzle at first. In addition to collecting little yellow cubes, you also collect anti-cubes, which are considerably harder to find. There are puzzles within puzzles, levels within levels, and secrets within secrets. There's an entire language that can be decoded and translated if you pay close enough attention. Finding these deeper secrets and collecting anti-cubes is entirely optional, and you can still beat the game without finding a single one. But I found the game to be much more rewarding if you just fully succumb to its deeply layered world. Fez is a game that caused me to pull out a pen and notepad in order to jot down notes and keep track of various clues. I was completely consumed by this game during my playthrough. For a short time, I lived and breathed it. And it's not just because of the puzzles. This game has immaculate vibes. The pixel art is simple but gorgeous, and there are lots of little details in the environment that help bolster the game's aesthetic. The time of day slowly shifts as you play, leading to beautiful sunsets and lighting changes that transform the feel of the levels. The immersion is also greatly assisted by the incredible soundtrack composed by Disaster Piece. It may just be a cute little puzzle platform game, but it feels emotional and profound to play. If you haven't played Fez and any of this sounds remotely interesting to you, you owe it to yourself to give it a whirl. Dark Souls is the Dark Souls of Souls games. It feels like no other game has been used as a point of comparison in the last decade more than Dark Souls, usually in the context of something just being really hard. Dark Souls being analogous to anything that is difficult is pretty reductive considering how much else the game has going for it. It's a fantastic game that is full of mystery and intrigue, with weighty combat and phenomenal world design. It has a nice variety of playstyle options, and most of the creature designs are particularly creative and distinct. That being said, it is kind of crazy that Dark Souls became such a massive hit considering how brutal, unforgiving, and downright mean it can be. I was initially not a fan of the game because I had a pretty rough first impression of it. I had made it through the starting area, beat the tutorial boss, and began fighting my way through the Undead Burg. I made it pretty far, or so I thought, but then I got killed and respawned all the way back at Firelink Shrine. And that's when I noticed that I lost all of the souls that I had collected and thus couldn't level up my character. Then I realized I had to redo the entire section I just did, which was probably 20 or 30 minutes of progress. I was a little frustrated and decided to take a break from playing, but for whatever reason before I quit, I figured I'd just blow off some steam by f***ing around and fighting the NPC that was sitting near the bonfire at Firelink Shrine, assuming that I could just reload my save afterwards. Instead, what happened was I f***ed around and found out that Dark Souls is a game that makes you live with your choices. I was horrified to see that the once peaceful NPC was fully aggroed toward me even after I died and respawned. I was stuck in this hell loop of getting killed, respawning, and then getting killed again. I thought to myself, fuck this game, and I uninstalled it from my Xbox 360. I didn't return to Dark Souls until many years later, but when I did pick it up again, I approached it with a different mindset, and okay, I just gotta stop being stupid here. Oh, like that? Oh no. I loved it. Once it clicked with me, it became a truly rewarding experience and I got pretty obsessed with it. The world design is staggering. The first time I learned that the elevator from the Undead Parish led right back to Firelink Shrine, I was floored. Dark Souls is a game that's occasionally frustrating, but frequently mind-blowing and awe-inspiring. It's not perfect, but spoiler alert, no game is. I don't have too much more to say about Dark Souls that hasn't been said by countless others, but yeah, it's really that good. It's often imitated, but few games hold a candle to the OG. It also feels appropriate that I spent most of this section complaining about the game and then still putting it in my top 10. It just speaks to how hard my opinion has changed about the game. This entry truly is the Dark Souls of list entries.
And may the age of fire perpetuate.
Target down. Next up, Francesca DeSantis.
Okay, I admit this one feels a little bit like cheating because World of Assassination is essentially just a package of Hitman, Hitman 2, and Hitman 3, but it's sold as one product, your progress tracks across all of the games, it plays like one cohesive experience, and it's all under one executable, so I'm gonna count it as one game. All of that aside, if I had to sum up how I feel about the modern Hitman games, I would describe them as one banger after another. You play as the bald and barcoded Agent 47, and you travel from exotic location to exotic location in order to take down pre-designated targets by any means necessary. These assassination targets are generally painted as rich, powerful, and evil figures hell-bent on making the world worse, which in turn makes it feel like life as a contract killer is actually morally correct and totally justified. The game has a crisp, clean graphical presentation that looks great, but the real secret sauce comes from the humor and emergent gameplay.
Follow me or you'll get hurt.
Hitman is both intentionally and unintentionally hilarious. Even though there's plenty of dry humor from the witty writing and voiceover performances, much of the humor comes from the cause and effects of the player's actions.
Oh shit.
The levels are filled with an insane amount of things to interact with, and since there are so many ways you can approach your assassination targets, you often end up in a chaotic situation when your plan backfires.
There are barely any people around. Like you have, I don't know. I mean, except for in the hot areas that are going to be hard, right? But
oh, you're gonna need to kill him.
Boy.
You just go up and axe him in the head.
Oh yeah, he's the only one there.
Melee kill.
He's the only one there. Just
don't
run up
throw.
to him. Is that R2? What is that? Run up to him.
Square.
Fucking hit. You might want to go. Did you see what Sheik Zanzibar did? That guy's fucking crazy.
The disguise system is brilliant because different outfits have different levels of access to certain areas. So knocking someone out and taking their clothes is not only cartoonishly funny, but it has major gameplay implications as well. Hitman gives you the tools to be creative, but it also presents opportunities that will gently guide you towards some of the fun ways to take out your target if you feel like you need some direction. One of the strongest elements of Hitman is the replayability. The game encourages you to replay levels over and over again to try different strategies, with additional tools and starting locations being unlocked the more you play. Another thing that makes Hitman infinitely replayable is the relatively recent game mode Freelancer, which essentially turns the game into a roguelite with randomized locations and targets, as well as a completely new progression system. Freelancer mode is wildly fun, and it forces you to think outside the box, even if you're already familiar with the locations. In addition to this game mode, there are tons of seasonal events, elusive targets, and other bits of content that they're frequently adding to the game. Hitman is bursting at the seams with things to do, and it is supremely entertaining. Every time I pick this game back up, I think to myself, this is gaming at its peak.
The right man in the wrong place can make all the difference in the world. So wake up, Mr. Freeman. Wake up and smell the ashes.
Half-Life 2 is one of those rare cases where something is hyped up for years leading to its release, and then it somehow exceeds all expectations. As a big fan of the original Half-Life, I was itching to dive into the sequel when it came out back in 2004. I remember getting together with a few friends and driving out to Costco to buy a copy of Half-Life 2, and then staying up all night at my house taking turns playing the campaign. I remember we were all blown away by the slick cinematic presentation, the music and sound design, the physics-based puzzles, and the diverse and detailed levels. Sure, games and technology have gotten a lot more advanced in the 20-some-odd years since the game came out, but I gotta say, Half-Life 2 still holds up incredibly well and is an unparalleled single-player experience. It's hard to put my finger on exactly what makes this game so special. I hate to be this trite, but Half-Life 2 just has a cool vibe. The world building and atmosphere are really immersive, and it helps that every aspect of the game, from the sound effects to the UI to the weapon skins, etc., is executed at an extremely high level. This game is also a masterclass of design in that it doesn't hold your hand or tell you how to do something. It forces the player to take note of the environment and figure out what to do on their own. Yes, that means there are plenty of times where you feel stuck, but then you feel really smart once you figure out what to do. Since the game trains the player to be mindful of their surroundings, it sets the stage for the game's signature weapon, the gravity gun.
There we go.
Oh! Ho, ho! The gravity gun lets you grab any object that isn't bolted down and lets you blast it in any direction. The player is already used to looking around the environment in order to progress, so they can use that same observational skill to find objects to manipulate with the gravity gun, whether it's to solve a puzzle or simply just to shoot a random object at an unsuspecting foe. Any game that lets you kill someone by hurling a toilet at them is a-okay in my book. It's hard to overstate how impactful Half-Life 2 was for me and for the gaming community at large when it was released, but I feel like enough time has gone by since then that many gamers, particularly younger ones, haven't played it. So if you're one of those people, well, you really should play it. At this point in the video, it's hard not to sound repetitive when wrapping up each game. I feel like I end each section with something like, this game is a rewarding experience that is well worth playing. But for Half-Life 2, it's no different. This game is a rewarding experience and it's well worth playing. When you describe what Rocket League is to someone who doesn't know, it's hard not to sound like you're stoned out of your gourd. So it's like soccer, right? But get this, instead of like
people playing on the field, it's like cars instead, and the ball is like huge, bro. Oh yeah, and like sometimes you play matches underwater and it's fucking crazy.
Even though the concept sounds like a novelty, Rocket League is the real deal and is consistently one of the best multiplayer games out there. I'm not really a big soccer fan or anything, so keep that in mind when I say this next sentence. Rocket League is the best translation of soccer to a video game. I can't speak for what current day FIFA games do, but in my experience with those games, you play as an entire team and you control whichever player on your team currently has possession of the ball. That totally works fine, of course, but in Rocket League, you control one individual player throughout the match, which means you feel more immersed as you have full control of your positioning both on and off ball. You can play more defensively or play in a hybrid midfield position, or you can just beeline toward the ball at all times like a dog chasing a garbage truck. Editor's note, the recent game Rematch also lets you control an individual player for the whole match. It's a pretty fun game, but ironically it feels like a knockoff of Rocket League, right down to the art style and arena design. And it's not as good. The freedom of movement makes the game incredibly satisfying because when you pull off a cool move, you really feel like you've earned it.
Oh yeah! Fuck yeah! Let's go!
Get him wet, Shaggy.
Oh. Fuck yes!
Conversely, you feel like a complete buffoon whenever you whiff on a shot or flub a save attempt.
No, I fucked up. No.
Thankfully, you can always use the D-pad to quickly communicate to your teammates.
Sorry.
Rocket League hits the sweet spot for accessibility. It's easy to pick up, but difficult to master. It's not that hard to hit the ball, but if you really want to hit the ball well, you have to take into consideration your speed, your teammates' positions, your opponent's positions, how much boost you have, what angle you are relative to the walls, what angle you have to hit the ball, etc. One thing that really helps with all that is that the game lets you turn on ball cam, which makes it so your screen always faces the ball regardless of which way your car is facing. This feature is crucial to the game's success in my opinion, because otherwise it can be a little difficult to track what's happening in the game. Rocket League is fantastic to play with your friends, and it's still mostly fun to play with randos, although like any multiplayer game, it's always a roll of the dice to see what kind of teammates you end up with. There are a fuck ton of cosmetic options to customize your car, and I enjoy making lots of various preset combinations to have in my garage, even if it's just to spice up the visuals a bit during an extended play session. This is the type of game I'll revisit for a few weeks every year without fail, and every time I do, I'm reminded of how fine-tuned and excellent the gameplay is. Rocket League is somehow more than a decade old, but it is without a doubt an all-time classic, and perhaps most importantly, it continues to have a big enough player base to keep it viable for years to come. Speaking of iconic multiplayer games, it would be remiss if I didn't include one of the most formative games for me, Counter-Strike. By now you all know that I'm an old man, so when I say Counter-Strike, I'm not talking about the current version CS2, and I'm not talking about CSGO or even CS Source. I'm talking about the Counter-Strike that was out before Steam even existed. In fact, the reason I downloaded Steam to begin with was because it was required in order to play CS version 1.6. Steam's entire existence at first was to serve as a launcher for Counter-Strike. It was a game that my friends and I would play after school on a regular basis back when I was in high school. I hosted several LAN parties at my house, which meant that 6 or 7 people would bring their entire PC setups over and connect to a local network hub, just so we could be in the same room while we played private matches of Counter-Strike all night long. It was mostly an excuse to hang out, eat snacks, drink Mountain Dew, and talk shit with my other nerd friends. I couldn't dig up any pictures of my old LAN parties, so I'm showing some random pics of other people's LAN parties that I found on Google just so you get the idea of what I'm talking about. Sadly, LAN parties are now a relic of the past, but they were some of the best times gaming I've had in my whole life. Nowadays, it's easy enough to get together with friends on voice chat and whatever, and that's great, but there was something special about physically being in the same room and locking in for hours, calling it quits only once the sun was already rising the next morning. I can't emphasize enough how obsessed my friends and I were with this game. One time people were over at my house, but the network wasn't working, so instead of playing Counter-Strike, we made a sketch comedy video where we pretended to play it IRL.
You take the point.
I also created flash cartoons about the game in a genre of animation referred to as CS toons at the time.
Terrorists win.
I even learned how to use the map making tools and created a level based on my house, which we would then play while being in my house. So yeah, it's safe to say that I have a pretty deep personal connection with Counter-Strike. I haven't really talked much about the game itself, but this entry is more about how the game impacted me at a certain time in my life. It's one of the only games on this list that I don't really have a desire to revisit ever again, not because it isn't good, but mostly because nothing I do with the game now will ever top the experience I had with it in my youth. I'm not particularly interested in playing CS2 either for the same reason. I fired up CS 1.6 to get some footage for this video, but outside of that, I think I'm done with this game. Counter-Strike represents an era that I will always cherish in my memories, and since it was such a huge part of my life for a few years, it's an automatic lock to be in the top 10 of my best games of the century. Alright, before we get to the rest of the countdown, I just want to give a shout out to a couple of honorable mentions. These are all games that when I think of, I was just like, yeah, of course it's a top 25 game. But then when I actually put the list together, I'm like, this might actually not make the cut. So I'm just gonna rattle off a bunch of games that I wanted to include, but barely missed the cut. Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice, Slay the Spire, Doom 2016, Metroid Prime, Halo 3, Far Cry 3, Super Mario Galaxy 2, Astrobot, Hollow Knight, Valheim, Duck Game, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, Grand Theft Auto 5, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Neon White, Resident Evil 4 Remake, Hearthstone, Shovel Knight, The Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion, Dead Cells, The Binding of Isaac Rebirth, Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, Pokemon Emerald, Quiplash, Soul Calibur 2, UFO 50, Wii Sports, Tony Hawk's Underground, Unreal Tournament 2004, Risk of Rain 2, Clair Obscur Expedition 33, and Lies of P. Wow, that's a bunch of really awesome games. Too bad they just didn't have what it takes to make the list. All right, let's get back to the countdown.
Foul tarnished. In search of the Elden Ring. Emboldened by the flame of ambition.
I honestly can't believe Elden Ring is a real game. It boggles the mind to think about how the developers at From Software were able to accomplish creating a game that is so massive in scale, yet retains the feeling of a deep and layered handcrafted experience. Elden Ring essentially takes the combat mechanics and dark atmosphere of Dark Souls, combines them with the massive open world formula of Breath of the Wild, both of which were previously mentioned on this list, and smashes them into one truly epic action RPG. The key to the game is variety. There are so many different play styles to choose from. You could be a nimble dex build, a bonk heavy oaf, a parry god, a faith magic user, an intelligence magic user, a hand-to-hand boxer, a great shield turtle build, a pyro boy, and so on and so on. There are so many weapons, spells, combat arts that you can really get creative with the type of tarnished you want to be. The flexibility of the gameplay combined with the nearly countless amount of areas to explore and enemies to fight make Elden Ring one of the most replayable single-player games I can think of that's not a roguelike. Now I can already hear people in the comments scoffing at the idea of variety in this game, citing how often enemies are reused and how many side areas like the catacombs and caves feel repetitive and recycled. To that I say, even if you remove all the instances of repeated mini-bosses and side areas, there's still a staggering amount of unique enemy types and bespoke areas to explore, and many of the repeated areas like the catacombs are totally optional. You can't let a few reskinned enemies distract you from the fact that the variety in this game is on another level. The other thing that makes Elden Ring so special is the world design. For first-time players, the game does a really good job of hiding how big the game actually is, and then slowly revealing the true scale of the lands between as you collect map pieces and explore. Every now and then, the game will lead you to a vista where you can look out into the distance and see a world of possibilities in front of you, and these moments absolutely blew my mind during my first playthrough. There's the iconic Limgrave reveal at the beginning of the game, the first view of Liurnia of the Lakes after going through Stormvale, and the reveal of the Altus Plateau in the mid-game, just to name a few of the moments that made my jaw drop. On top of that, nothing could have prepared me for when I took an elevator underground and learned that there are massive subterranean ruins that are almost as big as the entire map. If you've somehow never played Elden Ring, I'm sorry for ruining a few of these moments, but trust me, there's so many other secrets to find that it's impossible for me to ruin that experience for you. It almost can't be overstated how magical it felt to explore this game and experience these reveals at my own pace. And the craziest part is that some of these moments can be missed entirely if you don't explore thoroughly enough. From a game design perspective, it takes balls to put so much work into something that players could miss, but that's something that From Software has been doing for a long time in their games. Another thing that From Software is famous for is their boss design. There's something like 150 bosses in this game, and that doesn't even include the DLC. Most of them are optional, but there's something that's always so satisfying about taking down an enemy that has a big health bar at the bottom of the screen. The wide variety of boss encounters test the player to overcome challenges in many different scenarios, whether they're large open areas or in more cramped rooms, whether they're gank fights or mano-a-mano. They aren't all winners by any means, but there are more than enough fun and memorable fights to keep things feeling fresh and rewarding. There's so much more I can say about Elden Ring, but I have to keep things moving since I'm talking about 25 games here. It's not a perfect game, but the sheer amount of incredible content in it is legendary, and it's a game that I'll probably keep returning to as long as I still have working thumbs. Throughout history, mankind has occasionally created something so groundbreaking that it alters the very fabric of our existence. Sometime around 4000 BCE, the wheel was created, which opened up a whole new world of technological possibilities. In 1450, Gutenberg invented the printing press, which would allow for the mass production of books and the written word. And of course, in the year 2000, Neversoft added the manual to Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, which would allow players to string together massive combos and rack up scores higher than ever before. Many thought this was the peak of Western civilization, but then 1 year later in 2001, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 would introduce the revert, which would allow combos to continue even after completing a vert trick. Alright, in all seriousness, by the time Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 came out, the developers had crystallized the skateboarding mechanics, and as a result, THPS 3 is not only the most tightly designed game in the series, but it's also one of the best flow state games, period. Once you get comfortable with the controls, you can just shut your brain off, soak in the punk rock vibes, and skate around freely, grinding on anything that has an edge and tying together absurd combos. There are times where the flow state is interrupted slightly when you need to accomplish specific goals that require a bit more focus, such as collecting skate letters or getting Chuck unstuck, but these goals are generally fun to do and can sometimes lead to discovering more areas that can be used creatively in a combo. The fluidity of the gameplay is helped greatly by the fact that this was the first Tony Hawk game in the PS2/GameCube generation, and it targeted 60 frames per second as opposed to the previous games which are limited to 30. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 was a foundational game for me, but I chose Pro Skater 3 for this list mostly because it feels that much better to play with the increased frame rate and the inclusion of the revert. Later games in the series were also very good, particularly Tony Hawk's Underground, aka Thug, but 3 is just a tighter experience with better in-game goals and zero bloat in terms of content. The levels in Tony Hawk 3 include some of the absolute best in the series, such as Airport, Foundry, Rio, and Los Angeles. The levels are imaginatively designed and serve as virtual playgrounds where you can skate or grind on pretty much anything. Playing Tony Hawk over the years has rewired my brain and changed the way I view the world. To this day, I'll be out on a walk and I'll notice railings, sidewalks, staircases, or whatever, and I'll quietly think to myself, man, I could grind on that for a killer combo. As the saying goes, you can only achieve true transcendence when you see the entire world as a Tony Hawk level. These games were my introduction to skate culture back in the late 90s and early 2000s, and they inspired me and many of my friends to get skateboards of our own and try to ollie or kickflip in our driveways. It didn't take long for me to realize that maybe skateboarding wasn't for me, mostly because I was absolutely terrified of falling down or getting hurt even in the slightest. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 in its original form is a bit hard to come by these days. If you have a PS2, GameCube, or original Xbox, you can always find a used copy on eBay or whatever. For everyone else who doesn't own a retro console, there's a decent remake of Tony Hawk 3 and 4, as well as a stellar remake of Tony Hawk 1 and 2, that are a pretty solid way to play the games on modern hardware. No matter how you play it, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 is an all-time classic. The Pro Skater series set the standard for how extreme sports games should be done, and even though the series eventually lost its way, nothing can change the fact that for a stretch of time, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 was gaming at its best. If you've never played Diablo II, you might be looking at this gameplay footage and wondering to yourself, how could this possibly be the third best game of the century? First off, how dare you? Secondly, this was made 25 years ago, so as a society, we obviously weren't as graphically advanced as we are today, even though I'm still pretty fond of the aesthetic. But perhaps most importantly, this game is addicting. A basic explanation of the gameplay loop would be as follows. Kill monsters, find loot. Use loot to make your character better at killing monsters. Kill stronger monsters, get better loot, rinse and repeat. It's an amazingly effective hook that makes the game extremely hard to put down, because who knows what kind of treasure is waiting for you in the next dungeon. You just have to play a little bit longer to find out. And if this gameplay loop sounds familiar, it's because Diablo was highly influential to many games that have come out since its initial release. We wouldn't have looter shooters like Borderlands or Destiny without Diablo, and we certainly wouldn't have more modern dungeon crawlers like Path of Exile or even Minecraft Dungeons, a game which is basically baby's first Diablo. So I've emphasized that this game is addictive, but that doesn't necessarily mean good. I mean, cigarettes are addicting too. However, there's lots of other elements working in concert with the gameplay loop that make Diablo 2 so special and fun. The dark fantasy art direction, the snappy combat, the incredible music and sound design, the wide variety of characters and playstyle options, the unpredictable level layouts, and of course, the cornucopia of loot to collect and hoard. It's also hard not to like a game that lets you summon a pack of wolves to be your friends and help you take on the demons of hell. Diablo is also the first franchise I can recall that uses procedural generation for both level layouts and enemy placement. This makes the game feel infinitely replayable because no two playthroughs will be the same. Of course, now we're living in the era of roguelikes where randomly generated content is commonplace, but trust me, this was a pretty novel feature back in the early aughts. In a similar fashion to Counter-Strike, Diablo 2 was also one of those games that I would play over a local network with friends and stay up until the wee hours of the night. Back when I was in middle school, my ideal evening would be to have a friend over and start new characters in Diablo 2, and then see how far into the game we could get before we got too tired to continue. There's something just so magical about playing an RPG like this in co-op, because we could focus on building our own characters and getting the best gear, while also finding synergies with the other player and teaming up to get past some of the trickier sections of the game. Thankfully, this is something that players can still experience today because Blizzard released a remaster of Diablo 2 a few years ago that's actually pretty good, which is kind of shocking considering how downhill that company has gone under Activision's ownership. They overhauled the graphics and the UI in a way that looks great on modern hardware, but crucially, they stayed faithful to the game's original art direction, so the vibes are still as dark and creepy as ever. And if you're a purist, you can switch back to the original graphics with the press of a button since it's the same game underneath that new coat of paint. Diablo 2 is pure, unadulterated dungeon crawling bliss, and despite having many imitators, it still stands tall as one of the best games of all time.
Stay a while and listen.
Beasts all over the shop. You'll be one of them, sooner or later.
Elden Ring is easily the biggest and most impressive game that From Software has ever made, but my favorite game by that developer is Bloodborne, and goddamn what a game it is. Bloodborne feels like it delivers on the promise that Dark Souls established, and even though I absolutely adore Dark Souls, which was number 10 on this list, it's not exactly a hot take to say that the final few sections feel slapped together and rushed compared to the rest of the game. Bloodborne, on the other hand, is a tightly constructed game that basically never dips in quality from beginning to end, unless you spend time in the optional Chalice dungeons, which is something I don't particularly recommend. On top of that, the Old Hunters DLC is arguably one of the finest pieces of additional content ever made. So what is it about Bloodborne that makes it a notch above Dark Souls and Elden Ring? Perhaps the most noticeable difference is the setting and the tone. Rather than taking place in the typical fantasy setting of the Middle Ages with knights and dragons, Bloodborne is set in Victorian-era Europe with top hats, gas lamps, and pistols. The result is a game that feels fresh and sets itself apart from so many other games in the genre. Bloodborne is also delightfully disturbing. While Dark Souls is grim dark fantasy that is often creepy and dour, Bloodborne is straight up Lovecraftian cosmic horror, with more gore and more disturbing creature designs, and is all in all a much scarier game. This Lovecraft inspiration and gothic setting lends itself to another awesome aspect of Bloodborne. the lore. Now, I have to admit right up front, I'm not smart or observant enough to have really picked up on what this game was putting down on my first playthrough. Like pretty much every other From Software title, the story is obtuse and cryptic, but very rich and rewarding if you're willing to put in the time to talk to all the NPCs and read all the item descriptions, which I don't have the patience to do. But plenty of other people have. I can't possibly do the Bloodborne story justice by trying to summarize it for this video, so I'm not even going to try. But there are some excellent in-depth story analysis videos out there, and if you really want to dive deep, there is a 100-page document called The Pale Blood Hunt by Redgrave, which puts together the Bloodborne lore into a highly readable narrative. So to reiterate, I don't have the patience to read item descriptions, but I do have the patience to read 100-page fan-made lore documents. Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with me either. All that is to say, even though it takes a little effort, I found myself fascinated by the story of this game, which is something that doesn't really happen to me that often. I've barely talked about the Bloodborne gameplay, so let me quickly talk about a few things it does really well. The game focuses on dodging and parrying as opposed to blocking with the shield, which leads to quicker and more intense battles than previous Souls games. The game also encourages the player to be aggressive. If you get hit and lose health, you can regain some of that health by going in and counterattacking instead of backing down to heal. Bloodborne also does away with equipment load and fat rolling, so no matter what build you go with, you're guaranteed to be quick and nimble on your feet. One of my other favorite little touches in this game is how it handles parries. Typically this would happen with a shield, but in Bloodborne you use a pistol. If you time your shot just before the enemy is about to swing, it puts them in a dazed state where you can quickly follow up with a super powerful visceral attack. It's easier said than done, because if you miss the parry window, you're left completely vulnerable to whatever nasty combo your foe has in store for you, but it's a high-risk, high-reward system that is incredibly satisfying to pull off.
Yeah! Get your ass out of here!
I also have to mention that one of the big strengths of the game is that it is focused and narrow in scope. There are less weapons to choose from and areas to explore than Dark Souls and certainly Elden Ring, but that means that the content that is here is of high quality and balance. There's so many other wonderful touches in this game that I really like, but once again I have to keep this video moving. Is Bloodborne a perfect game? No, it definitely has its flaws, but Bloodborne is so good that it's one of my all-time favorite games despite being limited to 30 FPS with bad frame pacing, which is a flaw that would normally be the death knell for a lesser game. There's a reason why so many fans are clamoring for this game to get a remaster or even just an official 60 FPS patch. The good news is that this game is starting to run really well on PC via emulation. Keen observers will have probably noticed that some of my gameplay I've shown looks suspiciously smooth, and that may or may not be because I captured a bunch of this footage while trying it out via PS4 emulation. But whether you play it on emulation or on original hardware, there's no getting around that Bloodborne is a modern masterpiece. Alright, here we are, the #1 spot on the list. Now at the beginning of the video I included a disclaimer that said that this was a subjective list based solely on my opinion. And like, yeah, of course, I'm just stating the obvious, right? Well, the real purpose of that disclaimer was to mentally prepare you for my #1 choice. It's not a AAA game, and it's not a game with amazing graphics or a cinematic narrative, but it is a game that's been highly influential in the indie scene for the last 15 years, and it's a game that I've purchased no less than 5 times. Without further ado, my #1 game of the century is Spelunky. Now, before you rush to the comments section to tell me how my #1 choice is ass, or how you can't believe that your favorite game isn't my favorite game, or that I'm a pretentious indie game snob, or that I spend too much time stalling and making straw man arguments, first let me explain why Spelunky is so damn special. I know there are some real heads watching this who already know what's up with this game, but I'm guessing that many of you haven't played it. At first glance, Spelunky appears to be a simple 2D platformer with somewhat generic looking enemies where you collect treasure and avoid traps, which is far from a unique concept when it comes to game design. It has a cutesy art style that suggests it's probably a game made for kids. But what if I told you that beneath its cartoonish appearance, there's a massive iceberg of secrets and that this game is more brutal and unforgiving than Dark Souls? Oh! What the fuck? One of the primary ingredients of the game's special sauce is that it's a roguelike, which is a genre of game that skyrocketed in popularity after it was revitalized by Spelunky. If you somehow don't know what a roguelike is, it's basically a game that uses both procedural generation and permadeath as its 2 guiding principles. In Spelunky, level layouts are procedurally generated every time you play, so the path is never the same twice. There's also a strict set of rules that the designs must follow, like how there will always be an unblocked path to the level exit that doesn't require the use of bombs or ropes. However, just because there's an unblocked path to the exit doesn't mean that traversing there will be easy. There's more than a good chance that the path will be crawling with enemies and loaded with deadly traps, which leads me to the other guiding principle of a roguelike. Death is permanent. Oh! Oh! So if you die, you have to start the game over from the very beginning. This drastically raises the stakes and amps up the feeling of danger you feel when exploring the levels, because one wrong move could mean instant death, and then you're back to square one. So I'm just gonna, oh! More times than not, you will experience a brutal and sudden ending to your run, which can certainly be frustrating, but at the same time, dying is usually pretty hilarious because it always feels like your fault and not the game's fault. Oh! Too slow. Still gets you every time. And since level layouts are random, you can't memorize the placement of traps or enemies to mitigate the difficulty. You must think carefully and stay on your toes because being observant and methodical is often the key to survival. But also you can't be too methodical because if you take too long, a ghost will chase you down and spook your ass to death, instantly ending your run. So you have to be methodical and fast. It's so dastardly, I love it. Thankfully, Spelunky isn't a particularly long game, so starting over isn't nearly as painful as it could be, at least not until Spelunky 2. As a platformer, Spelunky feels fantastic to play. The controls are tight and precise, which is vital when you need to make quick life or death decisions. Pulling off cool moves and narrow escapes feels incredible, and the game has a high skill ceiling if you want to put in the work. Everything I've described so far is nice and all, and it adds up to make Spelunky a really good game. What makes Spelunky transcend to greatness, however, is the depth of its secrets and its sense of mystery. I'm going to go briefly into spoiler territory, so if you haven't played this game and you don't want to know anything about the nature of these secrets, you should skip ahead about 30 seconds or so. Spelunky has 4 main areas or biomes: the mines, the jungle, the ice caves, and the temple, each containing 4 levels that you need to complete before moving on to the next area. Once you make it to the 4th level of the temple, you face Olmec, the final boss, and once you've defeated Olmec, you've reached the end of the game and achieved victory. However, there's a secret 5th biome that has 4 more levels, with the true final boss waiting for you at the end. Getting to this secret final zone is not easy, and requires you to complete a plethora of tasks and challenges in a specific order throughout your run in order to meet the conditions for entry. These optional tasks aren't explicitly stated, but you'll likely bump into a few curiosities throughout your playthrough, such as the secret entrance to the black market, or perhaps you noticed a mysterious golden door in the temple. Slowly unraveling the process for opening these secret areas is tantalizing. And once you figure out what you need to do, there's an extra layer of enjoyment in trying to execute all of the challenges in one run to get the true ending. There are also many other smaller secret areas to discover throughout your journey that lead to rare items or weapons. These secrets breathe life into a game that is already highly replayable. I mentioned earlier that it's not a very long game, but it is a game that I replay over and over and over again because it offers something slightly different every time I load it up. Spelunky is a pioneer of the modern roguelike genre, and it was the first game of its kind that I played. I've come to really enjoy these run-based games, largely because of my love for Spelunky. The only reason I haven't played a ton of Spelunky in the last few years is because I've been more focused on Spelunky 2, which is a bigger and more expansive game with even more secrets and challenges than the OG. Editor's note, when I say OG, I'm not talking about the original freeware game that came out in 2008 by the same creator, mostly because the 2012 HD remake is more refined and became the definitive version of the game to play. Spelunky 2 is also an excellent game and easily could have made this list, but the original Spelunky is a more focused experience and it's the one that was more formative to me, and it still holds up beautifully today. There were lots of tough choices I had to make for this list, some of which I'm already second guessing, but this isn't one of them. It honestly wasn't difficult for me to put this game here in the #1 spot. I absolutely adore this game, and just the thought of firing this game up warms my heart and brings a smile to my face. That might sound corny, and it is, but that's the kind of feeling that made me confident that this is my favorite game of the 21st century. Oh, hey, you made it to the very end. Thank you so much for watching. We had an incredible journey together. I hope it got you thinking about what your top 25 games of the 21st century would be and how it would be different from mine. If you have the same 25 games that I do, then hey, we should be friends. But in all seriousness, I had a great time making this list. I think it was a really fun exercise to do. It did take a long time to make, a lot longer than I anticipated. In fact, I'm recording this outro maybe 8 months after I recorded the intro, so I've changed a lot as a human being from when I started this list and I ended this list. When I first came up with the idea to do this video, I'm like, yeah, this will be like a pretty straightforward video. I'll just like talk about some of my favorite games and I'll make a list and it'll be pretty like quick and dirty, you know, in and out. But one thing that sort of didn't really dawn on me until I was deep into the process was, oh yeah, I kind of have to write like 25 different reviews for this video, and that took a long time. The writing process alone took a while, and even though I didn't go too in depth with any particular game, it was still sort of a challenge to kind of sum my thoughts up and keep it under like, you know, 2 minutes per section, even though I'm sure if you timed it out, I didn't quite stick to that for some of them. I highly recommend that you make your own top 25 list, because when you actually write it down and you actually have to make the choices, it's really sort of interesting, the stuff that makes it and the stuff that doesn't make it, and you may surprise yourself on some of the decisions you end up making. I know I did. Now, I want to preface this by saying I stand by all my choices. I think these are all great games that are well worth playing, as I said many times in the video. At the same time, do I second guess some of the decisions I made? Of course. Throughout the editing process, I actually switched the order of these games a few times. Some games kind of quietly took out, some I added in later. But, you know, at a certain point, I kind of had to just lock in a list of 25 and just keep it as is. And I stand by those choices. I know I'm just kind of putting myself out there to be criticized. You know, there's no way that any of you actually have the exact same 25 as I do, but that's kind of the point. Different people have different opinions on games. I know I like to go around on YouTube and watch other people's lists that they make. So hopefully you enjoyed watching this as much as I enjoyed making it. It is just a part-time thing for me, so I can't unfortunately dedicate things full-time to doing this. It is a bit of a slow process for me, but I would like to continue doing more of this stuff. So if you enjoyed what you watch, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, let me know what you liked in the comments or what you didn't like, but you know, be nice about it. And yeah, hopefully I'll come back pretty soon with some more good stuff. And in the meantime, smell you later.